The air conditioning in the operating room, located 3 floors below street level in Tel Aviv, maintained a constant, artificial temperature of 18 degrees. It was a clinical cold, designed not for comfort, but for the preservation of the immense servers that buzzed behind the frosted glass walls and to keep the analysts' minds on perpetual alert. Rachel adjusted the gray wool cardigan over her shoulders, a gesture that had become a nervous tic in recent weeks. In front of her, the wall of monitors showed no satellite images of convoys, nor grainy videos of drones flying over dusty alleys. What shone on the screens were flows, lines of code, graphs of banking transactions, encrypted communication nodes, and heat maps that represented the density of data traveling between continents. It was a war without gunpowder, a war of silences. "We are ready for the Beirut phase," said a voice next to him. Rachel didn't turn around immediately. His eyes were fixed on a specific point on the central monitor, a digital node that pulsed rhythmically, connecting South America to the Middle East through a series of shell companies in Europe. That point was not just a given. He was a person, Mahmoud Khalil. "The window of opportunity is 40 minutes, Rachel," the voice insisted. It was Avner, a veteran field officer who had spent the past 2 decades coordinating kinetic operations. For him, success was measured in craters and neutralizations that were visually confirmed. What Rachel proposed, what she had spent a year building, was heresy to the old guard. "I know, Avner," she replied, her voice low, almost a whisper that forced the others to lean in to listen. "But we need to make sure that the redundancy of his system is down. If we take Khalil out and the money finds another way in less than 6 hours, we fail. We don't just want to stop the flow. We want them not to understand why it stopped." Rachel spun her chair. Her face, devoid of makeup and marked by deep dark circles under her eyes that she didn't try to hide, displayed a calm that unnerved her team. She was not a career military woman in the traditional sense. She was a systems architect, a woman who saw the world not as a chessboard but as a living organism, where every organ depended on an invisible blood flow. Hamas, she had argued months ago before the skeptical general staff, was not just an armed militia. It was a transnational logistics and finance corporation, and you don't kill a corporation by shooting its low-level employees. You kill it by inducing a systemic bankruptcy. "Redundancy is dead," said a young analyst sitting in the second row of workstations. "The mirror server in Malaysia went into unscheduled maintenance 10 minutes ago. Our local friends ensured that the fiber optic in that particular neighborhood of Kuala Lumpur suffered an accident with an excavator." A faint, barely perceptible smile touched Rachel's lips. Accidents, the new weapon of war. "And Khalil?" she asked, turning to Avner. Avner crossed his arms, the fabric of his shirt stretching over his tense muscles. He hated it. He hated the lack of definitiveness. "Our observers in Beirut confirm it. He is in the front office in the financial district. The meeting with the ghost investors starts in half an hour. If we are going to act, it is now. But I still think that's a mistake, Rachel. Leave him alive. He is an experienced operator. He will find a way to communicate." "He won't," Rachel cut in, with a firmness that chilled the room, "because he won't know what hit him. If we eliminate him physically, Avner, he becomes a martyr. Hamas appoints a successor within 24 hours. Security protocols change, and we lose the visibility that took us a year to gain. But if he just fail, if the money disappears under his custody, if the transfers he secured don't arrive." She stood up and walked to the big screen, touching the luminous dot that represented Khalil. "Distrust is a slower and more lethal poison than any explosive. We want them to doubt him. We want him to doubt himself." Rachel looked at the digital clock on the wall. 14:00 in Tel Aviv. 14:00 in Beirut. "Start White Shadow Protocol." The room did not explode into frenzied activity. There were no shouts of command, just the amplified sound of keyboards being typed with surgical precision. Modern warfare was silent. In Beirut, hundreds of miles away, Mahmoud Khalil's reality was about to be rewritten. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the scene that the data described. Khalil, a man of expensive suits and soft manners, who had never touched a rifle, sat at his mahogany table, preparing to authorize a transfer of funds vital to the maintenance of Gaza's underground infrastructure. It was millions of dollars, fragmented into thousands of microtransactions to avoid detection. Banking access blocked, the cybersecurity analyst announced. Not with a system error message, but with an invalid credential. Rachel nodded. It was a crucial detail. If the system showed technical error, Khalil would call support. But invalid credential? Or access denied by compliance? This generated fear. This suggested that someone, somewhere, had pulled a rug. The contingency accounts? Avner asked, still skeptical. Frozen by an automatic internal audit of the Swiss bank, replied another analyst. We triggered an anonymous money laundering alert 3 days ago. The bank's algorithm just processed and crashed everything. He's staring at a screen that asks him to contact the manager. And his phone number? Rachel asked. Cloned and isolated. Any message he tries to send to the coordination in Gaza, or to the chiefs in Qatar, will be diverted to a black hole server. They'll see the message as sent, but no one will ever receive it, and any response they send to him will be intercepted. Rachel imagined the cold sweat beginning to spring up on Khalil's forehead, the silent panic of a man who has built his life on reliability, and who suddenly finds himself unable to fulfill the only function that justifies his existence. He would try to call. No one would answer. He would try to transfer. The system would deny it. He would try to flee, but where? Without access to funds, he was a nobody. We are seeing movement in his metadata, said the young analyst. He's trying to access the backup system from his personal tablet. Let him try, Rachel ordered. Let him see that the backup is empty. The silence in the operating room lasted for long minutes. It was psychological torture carried out from a distance. They were dismantling a man's reputation and sanity in real time. He's leaving the building, Avner said, reading a report that arrived on his tablet. He looks agitated. He got in the car. It's going to the embassy. No, it changed course. It's going to the airport. Rachel let out the air that trapped in her lungs. He's running. He thinks he was burned internally. He thinks that the organization itself has betrayed him, or that the financial police are coming. The money has not been transferred, the financial sector confirmed. The flow has stopped. What about the purchases of construction materials that depended on this payment? Rachel asked, knowing the answer. Cancelled by suppliers in Turkey for lack of prior payment. The contract expired 2 minutes ago. Avner looked at Rachel, and for the first time the hardness in her eyes gave way to respectful caution. He's off the board, Rachel, without a shot. But now we have a bigger problem. I know, she said, sitting back down. Cold adrenaline rushed through his veins, leaving his hands slightly shaky. Silence. When Mahmoud Khalil did not make the payment and did not respond to messages demanding explanations, the Hamas nervous system would feel the first pang of pain, a phantom pain. They would not have known that it was an Israeli attack. They would think that Khalil made off with the money, or that he was arrested, or that he had a breakdown. Distrust would begin to spread like an infection. That was just the finance arm, Rachel muttered, more to herself than to the team. Now they will try to compensate. They will try to move resources from other areas. They will activate emergency protocols in Doha and Istanbul. She looked at the world map on the wall. The lights over Turkey and Qatar shone, innocent and dangerous. And that's exactly where we'll be waiting. The responsibility weighed on her like an anchor. What they had just done was not just stop a transfer. They had poked a giant in the dark. The reaction would come, not in the form of missiles, but in the form of a frenzied reorganization. And if Rachel and her team weren't perfectly synchronized to intercept this rearranging, the giant would wake up, notice the intrusion, and shed its skin, becoming invisible again. Get the Europe team ready, Rachel ordered, her voice regaining its metallic strength. And bring me the profile of the technology expert. I want to know what he eats, what time he sleeps, and what his biggest weakness is. Avner approached her desk, resting his hands on the glass surface. You know this is dangerous, Rachel. We are playing God with their infrastructure. If they perceive that it is a coordinated attack. If they notice, Rachel interrupted, looking him in the eye, then we've already lost. The only chance we have is to make all of this look like a series of unfortunate coincidences. Bad luck, incompetence, human error. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the cold of the room penetrate her bones. The enemy can't know you're at war, Avner. That is the only way to win. On the monitor, the dot that represented Mahmoud Khalil blinked one last time and went out. He had turned off his cell phone. I was in the dark, and with it a vital part of Hamas's machinery had just gone blind. But the success brought a bitter taste in Rachel's mouth. She knew that by removing one piece, she had altered the balance of the entire system. The consequences of that action, invisible and unpredictable, were already beginning to form on the horizon, like a storm that forms on the high seas, long before reaching the coast. She had taken the first step on a path of no return, where morality was as fluid as the dice running across the screens in front of her. Full monitoring in Doha, she said, ending the moment of reflection. The dominoes have fallen. Let's see what he brings down next. The absence of noise can be more deafening than an explosion. In the 3 hours that followed Mahmoud Khalil's digital isolation, the aquarium, as the team called the operating room, plunged into a kind of collective trance. There were no sirens, no red alerts flashing on the high-resolution screens. There was only the constant flow of data, rivers of information that ran silently through the fiber-optic cables under the floorboards, bringing news of a world that was beginning to choke without knowing why. Rachel remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest, watching the world map projected on the main wall. Small points of light, previously stable, began to oscillate. They were aftershocks. The epicenter had been in Beirut, but the shock waves traveled at the speed of light, reaching Doha, Istanbul, and Kuala Lumpur. The intermediary in Doha didn't show up for the meeting, said Sarah, the senior human intelligence analyst, her voice breaking the monastic stillness of the room. She adjusted the headset, pressing it against her ear as if trying to hear the thoughts of targets thousands of miles away. The logistical target, the merchant, has been in the hotel lobby for 40 minutes. He just ordered the 3rd coffee. It's checking the clock every 30 seconds. Rachel nodded, not looking away from the map. He's not going to show up, Sarah. The payment that should have released his trip never left Khalil's account. The airline reservation system automatically canceled the ticket due to lack of confirmation of funds. It is bureaucracy, not war. The merchant is trying to call the switchboard, Sarah continued. We are intercepting. He's furious. He says that it is a lack of respect, that the protocols are not being followed. Let him scream, Rachel murmured. Anger makes you careless. He will start calling unsecured numbers. It will try to circumvent the hierarchy. That was exactly what Rachel wanted. The structure of Hamas, like any large corporation or army, depended on a rigid chain of command and compartmentalization. The left hand was not supposed to know what the right hand did, only that the right hand was there. By removing Khalil's financial certainty, Rachel had severed the nerve that connected her hands to her brain. Now, the members moved spasmodically, trying to find support in the void. Avner approached her, bringing 2 cups of steaming coffee. The strong, bitter smell of the cheap drink from the hallway machine was the only aroma that broke the sterility of the air conditioner. He held out a glass to her. You look like a ghost, Rachel, he said, his voice low and hoarse. How long has it been since you really slept? Not those 20-minute naps in the chair, but real sleep. Rachel accepted the coffee, feeling the heat of the cardboard lightly burn her cold fingertips. Sleep is a luxury for when the system is stabilized, Avner. Now we are in the critical phase. Confusion is useful, but it's volatile. If they realize that the failure is systemic and not individual, they will close the floodgates. They go to analog. Paper, messengers on foot, cash in suitcases. If that happens, We are blinded again. Avner took a sip of his coffee, grimacing. They are already suspicious. In Istanbul, 2 of our logistics targets have just fallen off the radar. They turned off the phones, took out the batteries. They smelled burning. It's the survival instinct, Rachel countered. They think there is an internal leak. They are hiding from each other, not from us. This paranoia is our ally for now. She turned to face the veteran. Avner had deep wrinkles around her eyes, marks of someone who had seen many operations go wrong for minute details. He represented caution, the weight of history, the constant reminder that arrogance was the prelude to disaster. Rachel needed him. She needed him to be the devil's advocate, the anchor that kept her from floating away in the abstraction of data. "What's your real concern, Avner?" she asked. "It's not Istanbul." He sighed, looking at the screen where a new profile was being uploaded. The photo showed an ordinary-looking young man, thick-rimmed glasses, unshaven, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. He could be any engineering student at any university in Europe. But the name next to the photo, or rather the code name, carried a disproportionate weight. The architect. "That's him," Avner said, pointing to the photo with his chin. "The boy in Europe, the plan for him." "It's too risky, Rachel. Khalil was an administrator. This boy, it is the master key. He built the encryption they use. It manages the ghost servers. If you try to play with him, he can notice. And if he realizes that we are inside, he can turn the tide. It can feed us garbage, or worse, it can trace our intrusion back here." Rachel looked at the young man's photo. His real name was irrelevant to the operation, but his function was vital. He was the digital brain of the organization. While Khalil moved the money, the architect built the invisible roads along which the orders traveled. "The alternative is to neutralize him," Rachel argued. "Arrest him. Deport him. But if we do that, Hamas hires another one, or 2 others, and they will build a new system with new codes, new routes. It will take us another 2 years to decipher." "At least we'd be safe," Avner insisted. "Cutting off the snake's head is the tested method. We're not dealing with a snake, Avner. We are dealing with a hydra. Cutting off heads only multiplies them." Rachel placed the cup of coffee on the table, the decision hardening her features. "We won't touch him. Let's do something worse. Let's become his shadow." She turned to the cyber operations team, where the leader, a man named Yossi, awaited instructions. "Yossi, what is the status of the injection into the target's device in Europe?" "We're ready, boss," Yossi replied, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "We identified a vulnerability in the update of his laptop's operating system. We can insert the logger on the next reboot, but it's a heavy package. If it's as good as we think, you can notice the latency. A millisecond delay in keyboard response." "He'll notice," Avner said behind Rachel. "He lives in this world. He notices delays that we don't even see." Rachel felt the weight of doubt. Avner could be right. It was a very high bet. Turning the enemy's cybersecurity chief into his greatest source of intelligence required a technical arrogance bordering on recklessness. If they failed, the architect would close all of Hamas's digital doors in a matter of minutes. The entire operation, months of planning, would evaporate. But there was something more, an intuition that Rachel could not quantify in graphs. She had studied the psychological profile of the young man. He was brilliant, yes, but he was lonely, arrogant. He trusted his code as a religious trusts scripture. He would not believe that anyone could breach his shrine without breaking the windows. "Do it," Rachel ordered, "but don't use the system update. It's very obvious. Use the music channel." Yossi frowned. "The streaming service?" "He works listening to classical music. Rachmaninoff especially. Inject the code into the audio stream. They camouflage latency and music pauses. It will think it's an internet buffering problem, not the processor. His arrogance will fill the gap. He will blame the internet provider, not the computer itself." Yossi smiled, a technical smile of appreciation. "Brilliant. Preparing injection via audio stream." Avner didn't smile. He remained tense, watching the progress bars on Yossi's screen. "You're betting national security on the musical taste of a terrorist, Rachel. I'm betting on human nature, Avner. No one suspects what gives him pleasure. Silence reigned in the room again, but now it had a different texture. It was an electric silence, charged with expectation. On the main screen, an icon about Western Europe started flashing yellow, then green. Full injection, Yossi announced, his voice trembling with contained excitement. We're in. The audio masked the entrance. He did not react. Keep typing. What are we seeing? Rachel asked, approaching Yossi's screen. Everything, the analyst whispered. Every key, every movement of the mouse. We are seeing his screen in real time. At that time, the operations room in Tel Aviv expanded. They were no longer just looking at maps. They were sitting virtually next to the man responsible for protecting Hamas's deepest secrets. On the mirrored screen, lines of complex code scrolled rapidly. He was working on a new encryption routine. He's building a digital tunnel, Avner noted, leaning in to get a better look. Where to? To Malaysia, Yossi replied. He's trying to create an alternative route for the money, now that Beirut has fallen. He is reacting exactly as we predicted. Rachel felt a surge of relief, but she was brief. Immediate success was dangerous. He brought complacency. Don't celebrate, she said, her voice cutting. Now comes the hard part. We have to let it build. We have to let him think he's saving the organization. And then, Avner asked. Afterwards, we change the destination of the tunnel, 1 degree at a time, so subtly that when the money comes in, it doesn't go to Gaza. It goes into the void. The operation was entering a new phase, the active manipulation phase. Until now, they had only blocked and watched. Now they were beginning to drive the enemy. It was a heady power, and Rachel sensed the danger of it. The line between observer and participant was dissolving. Suddenly, Yossi became rigid in his chair. Wait. He stopped typing. All eyes turned to the mirrored screen. The cursor blinked, motionless, in the middle of a command line. The flow of music continued, but the hands of the architect had stopped. Did he notice? Avner asked, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt. A useless gesture in this war. I don't know, Yossi said, typing furiously on another screen to check the diagnostics. The logger is invisible. There is no sign of detection. On the screen, the mouse moved slowly, not to close the program, nor to run an antivirus. The cursor slid to the corner of the screen and opened an encrypted chat window. A message arrived from an unknown sender, identified only by a numerical sequence. The message was short, in Arabic. The flow has stopped in Beirut. The merchant in Doha is silent. What's going on? The architect hesitated. Rachel could almost feel his breath on the other side of the continent. He started typing a response. Technical failures, I'm redirecting, keep calm. He blacked out. He typed again. Investigating. Possible local interference. It blacked out again. The cursor was blinking. His indecision was palpable. For the first time, the man who had all the answers was in the dark. He doesn't know, Rachel whispered. He's scared. Finally, he typed, Standard procedure. Route change in progress. Don't use old channels. He sent it. He took the bait, Yossi said, relaxing his shoulders. He thinks it's just a flaw he can fix. But Rachel didn't relax. His eyes were fixed on a detail on the mirrored screen, something the others seemed to have ignored. In the corner of the architect desktop, a small notification icon had appeared for a split second and disappeared. It wasn't from the operating system. It was from a third-party monitoring software. Yossi, she said. Her voice strained. Turn back the video buffer 10 seconds, the bottom right. Yossi obeyed. The image receded and froze. There it was, a small gray eye that blinked and disappeared. What's that? Avner asked. This isn't ours, Rachel said, feeling a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Someone else is watching him. The room was absolutely silent. The premise of the operation was invisibility and total control. The idea that there was a third variable, another observer in the room with them and with the target, changed everything. Could it be Hamas's internal intelligence? Sarah suggested. Monitoring the agents themselves? Or it could be another agency, Avner said. Americans, British, Russians. Or it could be something worse, Rachel said. It may be that he knows he is being watched and has installed a canary, a silent alarm that goes off when someone invades his space. If that icon was an alarm, then the architect wasn't just typing codes to embezzle money. He was performing. He was pretending he didn't know while setting a trap. Rachel looked at the screens, at the data empire she had built. Suddenly, the sense of omnipotence disappeared. She felt exposed. The decision not to neutralize the target, to try to use it, now felt like a precipice beneath his feet. "Keep an eye on it," she ordered, but her voice wasn't as sure as before. "But increase passive vigilance. I want to know where that icon signal was sent. If it triggered an alert, we need to know who received it." Avner approached, speaking only for her to hear. "I told you so, Rachel. Acting fast, trying to be too smart. This generates ghosts. Now we don't know if we are watching a master at work or if we are the audience of a theater set up to deceive us." Rachel didn't answer. She looked at the point of light in Europe. What was once a clear window to the enemy now looked like a distorted mirror. The white shadow operation had begun with surgical precision, but the patient had just opened his eyes on the operating table. And Rachel didn't know if he was awake or just dreaming. Doubt, the one she had hoped to plant in the enemy's mind, had just taken root in her own war room. The operating room, once a sanctuary of absolute control, now seemed to vibrate with a dissonant frequency. The little gray icon, that digital eye that had blinked and disappeared on the architect screen, remained frozen on the main monitor, magnified dozens of times. It was a harmless set of pixels to a layman, but to Rachel's team, it represented the most terrifying variable in any intelligence equation: the unknown. Rachel stared at the image, her eyes burning with fatigue and blue light. The certainty that had sustained her until that moment began to show cracks. "The tracking analysis is back," Yossi announced, his voice losing his usual confidence. He didn't look at Rachel. His eyes were fixed on the raw data that ran on his personal screen. The warning signal triggered by the icon did not go to Gaza, not even for Qatar. "Where did you go?" Rachel's question cut through the air, dry and immediate. "Vienna," Yossi replied. "A rented server paid for with cryptocurrency, with no clear ownership record. But the architecture of the heel, the way the signal was masked, it has the signature of Western intelligence." A collective, almost inaudible sigh ran through the room. The tension changed flavor. If it were Hamas, the operation would be burned. If it were an allied agency or rival is operating on the same ground, the game became political. "Americans?" Avner suggested, approaching Rachel. He seemed less tense but still cautious. "Or maybe the French? They have been monitoring financial networks in Europe aggressively lately." Rachel nodded slowly. The explanation made sense. It made a lot of sense. And that was exactly what bothered her. It was too convenient an answer to a problem that had come out of nowhere. "If it's them," Avner reasoned, "we're safe. They're just watching. They probably stumbled upon our target while investigating something else. The architect must have triggered a passive alert that they installed months ago. It's not a counterattack, Rachel. It's just congestion." Rachel wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that the white shadow was still invisible to the real enemy. If Avner was right, the presence of another agency was a manageable risk. They could even use this to their advantage, letting the other scouts see only what Rachel wanted to show. But what if it was a wrong assumption? What if the architect knows that Vienna is a common blind spot? She murmured, her fingers drumming on the arm of the chair. What if he purposely redirected the alert there, so that if someone intercepted, he would think exactly what we are thinking now? Avner snorted impatiently. "You're overestimating the boy, Rachel. He's good, but he's not a ghost. He's reacting to the financial chaos we've created. He's stressed, making mistakes. That icon was an oversight of his, a forgotten diagnostic tool, or malware he caught. Don't turn shadows into monsters. The time pressure weighed on him again. While they debated the nature of the icon, the architect continued to type, building his digital tunnel to Malaysia. If Rachel hesitated too much, she would lose the chance to manipulate the structure he was creating. She looked at the team, young, bright faces waiting for a direction. They trusted her. They trusted that she knew the difference between a noise and a signal. Let's assume it's benign outside interference, Rachel decided, her voice sounding firmer than she felt. It was a calculated choice, based on probability. But in the back of my stomach, it felt like a gamble. We will proceed with Phase 2, the injection of data. Avner folded his arms, clearly disagreeing with the bet, but respecting the chain of command. If we're wrong, Rachel, we'll deliver our digital signature directly to him. Then let's make sure the signature is illegible, she replied. Yossi, don't change the fate of the tunnel yet. That would be too aggressive. Instead, I want you to introduce variable latency into the data packets that it's sending. Make it seem like the connection to Malaysia is shaky. The goal? Yossi asked, already preparing the code. Frustration, Rachel said. I want him to doubt the infrastructure. I want him to think that the Malaysian route is compromised by poor technical quality, not sabotage. If he abandons the Malaysian route on his own, he will look for the next option on the list. And the next option. It's the server in South Africa, Sarah added, understanding the plan. The one we have totally controlled since last year. It was an elegant plan. Instead of forcing him into a trap, Rachel wanted to close the safe doors one by one, until the only door open was the trap, and he would enter it of his own free will, believing it to be his salvation. Performing latency injection, Yossi said. On the mirrored screen, the typing rhythm of the architect failed. He stopped. A speed test window has opened. The numbers fluctuated violently, simulated by Rachel's team. He's seeing the instability, Yossi narrated. He's trying to compensate, rewriting the compression protocol. Increase packet loss, Rachel ordered coolly. Make it lose 10% of the data, enough to corrupt files, but not enough to drop the connection. The architect hit the table. The sound was picked up by the laptop's microphone and echoed through the speakers of the aquarium. A human sound of pure irritation. He was losing his temper. He's closing the Malaysian tunnel, Yossi said, smiling. He gave up. It is opening the directory of alternate servers. Rachel felt a wave of triumph, but it was accompanied by a subtle nausea. It was working. The psychological manipulation was working. They were leading the target like a rat through a maze, using technical frustrations like walls. He selected South Africa, Sarah confirmed. The server Cape of Good Hope. It's ours. Great, Rachel said. Let him connect. Let the speed be perfect. Give him a sense of relief. The architect began to work furiously on the new connection. His fingers fluttered across the keyboard, building the bridge that would take Hamas's resources directly into a black hole monitored by Israel. He seemed relieved, confident. The trap had closed, but then something happened. In the corner of the architect's screen, a new chat window opened. It was not the official encrypted channel. It was an online gaming platform, a simple chat within a popular strategy game. It seemed like he was just taking a break. Or maybe checking out a personal account. He typed a quick message in the game's global chat. The weather in Vienna is cloudy today. The phrase seemed innocuous, a random comment from a bored player, but Rachel felt her blood run cold. Vienna, she repeated. He mentioned Vienna. It may be a coincidence, Wagner said, but his posture became rigid. He might have friends there. It can be a game code. No. Rachel approached the screen, almost touching the glass. The warning icon sent the signal to Vienna. Now he mentions Vienna in an open chat. He knows. He knows what? Yossi asked, stopping typing. He knows the alert has been triggered, Rachel said, her mind racing to connect the dots. He's not talking about the weather. He is confirming receipt. He's telling someone that the canary sang. The room plunged into terrified silence. Rachel's assumption that the icon was an outside interference or a mistake was crumbling. If that phrase was code, then the architect wasn't frustrated with the Malaysian connection. He had moved to South Africa not because he was forced to, but because he wanted them to see it. "He's feeding us," Avner whispered. "He knows we're watching. He switched to the South Africa server because he knows it's a trap, and he wants to keep us busy there while he does something else." Rachel felt the weight of her error in judgment. The arrogance of believing that she could control the narrative from a distance had blinded her to the possibility that the enemy could also read between the lines. She had interpreted the icon as noise when in fact it was a test, and by reacting with the latency injection, she had confirmed their presence. "Cut the connection," Avner said. "Now, before he uses the South Africa link to inject something into our network." "No," Rachel shouted, stopping Yossi from pressing the button. "If we cut it now, we confirm his fear. We confirm that it is us." "He already knows, Rachel," Avner exploded, losing his composure for the first time. "The weather in Vienna. It is a security breach confirmation code. It is standard counterintelligence protocol. He's playing with us." Rachel looked at the young man on the screen. He kept typing, his face lit up by the monitor, his expression unreadable. He didn't look like a cornered terrorist. He looked like a chess player who had just sacrificed a pawn to expose the opposing queen. She had made a decision based on the logic that the enemy was in the dark. But what if, in fact, it was the one who was operating in a false light? "Keep the connection," Rachel ordered, her voice low but charged with a fragile authority. "But isolate the South African server. Create a sandbox around it. If he sends something, let him be imprisoned there. Don't let anything out." "It's risky," Yossi warned. "It's the only option," Rachel said. "We need to see what he will send. We need to know if he's just moving money, or if you're sending us a message." She leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep exhaustion. The White Shadow operation was no longer a precise surgery. It had become a duel of mirrors in a dark room. And Rachel had just realized that her reflection wasn't the only one that moved. The mistake had been made. The ambiguity had been interpreted with optimism, and now reality took its toll. The team's confidence was shaken. Avner looked at her no longer with skepticism, but with genuine concern. And on the screen, the architect smiled. A brief, almost imperceptible smile before typing again. Rachel saw it, and for the first time in years he felt afraid. Not from the failure of the mission, but from the depth of the abyss she had decided to face. The digital sandbox that isolated the South African server was a glass prison. Inside, the data sent by the architect began to accumulate, silent bites that Rachel's team observed like scientists in front of an unknown biological sample. There were no viruses, no destructive worms, no brute force attempts to escape isolation. There were only files. "These are text documents and spreadsheets," Sarah said, her voice tinged with cautious confusion. "And images. Lots of images." Rachel felt a tightness in her chest. She expected a cyber attack, something that could be countered with firewalls and countercode. But the enemy was sending paperwork. "Open the first batch," she ordered, keeping her distance from the screen, as if the information could be contagious. Yossi executed the command. On the main screen, a series of invoices and receipts unfolded. They were records of payments from medical clinics in Gaza, from flour suppliers, from electric generator maintenance companies, all with red stamps of canceled or transfer failed. "What's that?" Avner asked, his eyes narrowed. "Is he sending us his accounts?" "No," Rachel whispered, the understanding coming like a cold blow. "He's sending us the consequences." The next file was a short, soundless video, probably extracted from a security camera. It showed a dark hospital corridor, lit only by emergency lights. Nurses rushed, gesturing to unplugged machines. The date in the corner of the image was 2 hours ago. Exactly the moment when Rachel's financial blockade strangled the flow of diesel to the generators in that sector. Rachel looked away. The premise of her operation, the moral foundation upon which she had built the White Shadow, was surgical precision. Not to destroy, but to interrupt. Not to kill, but to blind. She had sold this idea to the general staff as a humane alternative to kinetic warfare. But the architect was dismantling this narrative file by file. He was not attacking Israel's servants. He was attacking Rachel's conscience. "It's propaganda," Avner said, his voice harsh, trying to break the spell that fell on the room. "He knows who we are. He knows that we are not field soldiers who see blood every day. He's aiming at our sensitivity. It's cheap manipulation, Rachel. Turn that off." "It's not manipulation if it's true," Sarah retorted, analyzing the metadata. "The transfers we blocked in Beirut, many of them were mixed. Money for tunnels and money for civil infrastructure in the same package. By stopping everything, we stop everything." The operations room, once united by a clear purpose of national defense, began to fracture. The younger analysts exchanged uneasy glances. They had been trained to intercept terrorists, not to watch the collapse of essential services caused by their own keyboards. "He's playing with our morality because he has no more technical cards," Avner insisted, grabbing Rachel's shoulder tightly, forcing her to look at him. "Don't fall for it. It's war. If we throw a bomb, people die. If we cut the money, people suffer. You knew that when you accepted the command. Don't pretend to be surprised now." Rachel let go of his grip. Avner was right, of course, but the brutality of his logic clashed with the silent promise she had made to herself, that intelligence could be cleaner than infantry. "He's not just showing us the damage," Rachel said, turning to the screen where the architect cursor flashed, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. "He's telling us that his system is symbiotic. He tied the war machine to the civilian survival machine so tight that we can't cut one without bleeding the other. He is challenging us to continue." On the screen, a new message appeared in the game's chat window, which he continued to use as a parallel channel. "Precision is an illusion. The cut is always blind." The phrase hung in the air, mockingly. "He's inside your head, Rachel," Avner warned, and this time there was a note of disappointment in her voice. "You're hesitating, and hesitation is where we lose. If you don't have the stomach to see the result of your work, pass the command." Those words were the breaking point. Rachel's authority, until then unquestioned, cracked. She saw in the eyes of her team not only doubt, but judgment. Avner, the man she saw as a dinosaur from ancient warfare, now looked the only one with clarity, and she, the visionary of modern warfare, was paralyzed by a security video and 3 lines of text. "Yossi," she called, her voice weak. "How long until we can isolate the purely military accounts from the civilian ones?" Yossi shook his head in desolate. "Weeks, maybe months." The architect mixed everything up at the code level. "It's a tangle. To separate, we would have to let the money flow and track the final destination, penny by penny. Which means we would have to fund Hamas for weeks to know what not to fund," Avner concluded derisively. Brilliant. Rachel felt the weight of failure crush her. Not the technical failure. They had stopped the money, after all, but the conceptual failure. The white shadow was not a surgery, it was a tourniquet applied to the neck. She looked at the monitor one last time. The architect will stop sending files. He knew he had already done the damage. He didn't need viruses to destroy the operation. He just needed the truth, ugly and raw, delivered at the right time. "Close the channel," Rachel ordered, turning her back to the screen. "Disconnect the South Africa server, burn the connection." "And the target?" Yossi asked. "We lose access to it if we do that." "We never had access to it," Rachel said, walking toward the exit of the room, desperately in need of air that wasn't recycled. "He had access to us." As she left the aquarium, the sound of the security door closing behind her sounded like a sentence. It left behind a divided team and an enemy that, even though financially blind, had just won the battle for the narrative. The invisible war continued, but Rachel was no longer sure if she was on the right side of the mirror. The hallway outside the aquarium was lined with exposed concrete and lit by fluorescent lamps that buzzed in a sharp tone, almost imperceptible, but which seemed to pierce Rachel's temples. She walked to the end of the hallway, where a narrow screened-out window offered a distorted view of the underground parking lot. There was no day or night down there, only the artificial passage of time marked by the guard's shifts. Rachel leaned her forehead against the cold glass. The image from the security video of the hospital in Gaza was still burning on his retina. She had spent a year convincing herself and her superiors that information warfare was the ethical evolution of conflict, that it was possible to fight without blood. But the architect had shown him the brutal truth. When you turn off the light of an enemy, you also turn off the light of those who live in their shadow. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Avner. The smell of old tobacco impregnated in his jacket gave him away even before his voice. "The director called," Avner said, stopping a few feet from her. He didn't try to console her. His posture was rigid, professional, but there was a new fatigue on his shoulders. He wants to know why the flow of data from South Africa was cut off. He wants to know why we are blind again. Rachel closed her eyes. "What did you tell him?" "He said that we had a technical failure of integrity, that the target tried to inject a virus and we had to isolate the network for protection." Avner paused. "I lied for you, Rachel, but I can't lie forever. They want results. They want to see Hamas's money dry up, and they don't care if it turns off the lights in a hospital or if the architect is playing psychological chess with us." Rachel turned around. His face was pale, but the expression of shock had disappeared, replaced by a hard resignation. "The operation is over, Avner. Not the way we planned. The white shadow depended on invisibility. It depended on them not knowing we were there. Now that he knows, now that he's using us as an audience for his propaganda, we are no longer the operators. We are the spectators." "Then change the channel," Avner said gruffly. "You wanted to have surgery, Rachel, but the patient woke up and is biting his hand. You have two options. Either let him go and let him run away, or you break his neck." The metaphor was violent, typical of Avner, but accurate. The surgery had failed. The attempt to keep the architect as an intelligence asset, to subtly manipulate it, had turned into a vulnerability. He was too smart, too fast, and worse, morally armed to destabilize her. "If we keep trying to manipulate him," Rachel reasoned aloud, "he'll keep feeding us poisoned data. It's going to mix civilian and military targets until we can't attack anything without causing a PR disaster. He will use our own ethics against us." "Exactly," Avner agreed. "Conscience is a luxury he doesn't have, but he knows you do. It's an asymmetry that you can't overcome with code." Rachel looked at her own hands. They no longer trembled. They were cold, motionless. She knew what needed to be done. It was the antithesis of everything she had stood for in the last 12 months. It was the admission that clean war was a fantasy. "Let's burn the net," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Avner raised an eyebrow. "Burn? We will no longer try to divert money or monitor the routes. We are going to destroy his digital infrastructure. We will release the Jericho package." Avner let out a low whistle. The Jericho package was a brute force cyber weapon. It was not subtle. It was an aggressive wiper designed to break into servers, overwrite all data with random garbage, and physically fry hard drives by forcing them to overheat. It was the digital equivalent of a saturation bombardment. "It's going to blind you," Avner said, "but it will also blind us. We will never know how they move the money again. We will lose years of accumulated intelligence, and the architect, he will know that we have declared total war." "He already knows," Rachel replied, moving away from the window. "The difference is that now he won't have a keyboard to answer." She passed through Avner and returned to the aquarium. The room was silent, the team immersed in an atmosphere of contained defeat. When Rachel entered, all eyes turned to her. They hoped for leadership, a magic solution that would bring back the sense of intellectual superiority they had hours ago. Rachel didn't give them that. She walked to her command station and entered her personal authorization code. "Attention, everyone. Change of operational guideline. Surveillance protocol canceled. Infiltration protocol canceled. Yossi raised his head, confused. Boss? Prepare the Jericho package, Rachel ordered. Target. All nodes identified in the Architect's network. Servers in Europe. Mirrors in Asia. And his personal laptop. A murmur of protest ran through the room. But Rachel, Sarah began, if we do that, we destroy the fountain. We will not be able to trace the original financiers. We will lose the map of the network. The map is already poisoned, Sarah. Rachel cut hard. What we're seeing isn't the real network, it's what he wants us to see. We are looking at a mirage, and as we look, he's moving real money behind our backs. The only way to stop this is to knock down the board. No one moved. The order ran counter to the intelligence preservation instinct of every analyst there. Destroying data was a cardinal sin in their world. It's a direct order, Rachel said, her voice echoing in the cold room. Execute. Yossi hesitated for a second, looking to Avner for support. Avner, standing in the doorway, only nodded, a brief somber gesture. Yossi sighed, his fingers hovering over the execution keys. Carrying Jericho, he said, his voice mechanical. Locked targets. Simultaneous injection in 3, 2. Hey. Rachel observed the screens. There were no explosions, no smoke. Just lines of red code cascading down the monitors that mirrored the enemy's systems. In Europe, the Architect's laptop would start to crash. The files would be irreversibly corrupted. The processor fan would spin to the limit, trying to cool a system that was being instructed to self-destruct. In a matter of minutes, the digital empire he had built would become useless silicon. The Architect icon on the main screen flashed red and then disappeared. Lost connection, with the notice read. Offline target. The silence that followed was not the tense silence of expectation, nor the focused silence of work. It was the silence of a funeral. They had won the immediate confrontation. The Architect was neutralized. The money would stop flowing, at least for now, until they bought new computers and built new networks. But Rachel tasted ashes in her mouth. She looked at her team and saw the distance in their eyes. They had executed the order, but confidence in the vision of it had disintegrated along with the enemy's data. She was no longer the brilliant leader who saw invisible patterns. She was just another commander who, when cornered, chose destruction. She sat up feeling incredibly small in the ergonomic chair. Operation White Shadow was over. They had accomplished their mission, to disorganize Hamas. But the cost was the very soul of the operation. Avner walked over and put his hand on the back of her chair. Done, he said. We gained time. It is the most that can be hoped for in this war. Rachel looked at the black screen where the enemy's intelligence once shone. We didn't get anything, Avner, she whispered. We just exchanged one blindness for another. The break was complete. Rachel had saved the mission by destroying it. And as the team began to file the final reports, she knew that the true consequence of that night was yet to come, hidden in the future, waiting for the right moment to take the price of that empty victory. 3 months have passed since the night the Jericho package turned Hamas's digital infrastructure into dead silicon. Tel Aviv was burning under the August sun, a heavy humidity that glued clothes to the body and made the air shimmer over the asphalt of Kaplan Avenue. But 3 stories below ground, in the aquarium, the artificial 18-degree winter remained unchanged. Rachel was sitting at her desk, but the desk no longer looked the same. The stacks of financial intelligence reports, once organized into logical and predictable flows, had been replaced by a mountain of disconnected fragments. Grainy photos of couriers crossing the border with backpacks, transcripts of phone conversations in archaic code, reports of seizures of cash in crumpled dollar and shekel bills. The elegance of war had disappeared. We have a new report from the Shin Bet, Sarah said, placing a physical folder on Rachel's desk. The use of paper had become more frequent, a symptom of the technological regression that Rachel herself had caused. The flow of money to the Northern Brigade has resumed. Rachel opened the briefcase. There were no graphs of bank transactions, no traces of cryptocurrencies. There were testimonies from informants, How? She asked without looking up. Hawala, Sarah replied. The old system. Trust, handshake, brokers of honor in exchange shops in Nablus and Jenin. No digital records. No servers to hack. No architects to monitor. Rachel closed her briefcase and leaned back in her chair. It was the ultimate irony. By destroying the enemy's sophistication, it had forced him to regress to methods that were, paradoxically, proof of modern technology. The Jericho had worked too well. It had pushed Hamas back to the Stone Age, where Rachel's satellites and algorithms were blind. And the coordination? Rachel asked. Non-existent, Sarah said. And that's the problem. Without a central leadership controlling the flow of resources, local cells are acting on their own. Robberies, local extortion, express kidnappings to finance small operations. Discipline is over. Chaos has taken the place of strategy. Rachel stared at the dark screen where, months earlier, she had observed the world as an omniscient god. Now she was just a bureaucrat trying to put together a puzzle whose pieces changed shape every day. She had wished to blind the giant, but in doing so, the giant had stumbled, and in his clumsy fall he was crushing everything around him without discretion. Avner was no longer there. He had requested transfer to the northern border 2 weeks after the Jericho incident. He said that he preferred to see the enemy through the sight of binoculars than through a screen that lied. Rachel missed him. She missed the hoarse voice that told her the truth she didn't want to hear. She got up and walked to the small pantry. The coffee tasted the same burnt as always. As he stirred the sugar, his gaze fell on a small radio that someone had left on at low volume on the countertop. A complex and melancholic piano melody floated in the static air. Rachmaninoff. Concert number 2. Rachel's hand stopped. The spoon clinked against the ceramic of the cup. The sound was identical to what she had heard months ago through the hacked microphone of the architect. Who turned that on? She asked, her voice coming out louder than she intended. A junior analyst, a boy who was barely old enough to shave, raised his head in fright. It was me, ma'am. It is the classic radio station in Jerusalem. I can turn it off if it's bothering me. No, Rachel said, approaching the radio as if it were an explosive device. Leave it. She heard the music. It was just a radio broadcast. A coincidence. Rachmaninoff was popular. But in Rachel's mind, music wasn't just notes. It was a signature. A reminder that somewhere, the man she had tried to destroy still existed. He had lost his servers, his codes, his tunnel to Malaysia. But he had survived. And if he was listening to that same song right now, in some cafe in Vienna or Istanbul, he was probably smiling, because he had understood something that Rachel was only now beginning to understand. Technology is fragile, but human will is adaptable. She went back to her desk and opened a locked drawer. Inside, there was a single flash drive, the backup of the data that the architect will send to the sandbox before it was hacked. The videos of the hospitals, the civilian supply lists. She had never had the courage to watch everything. Rachel took the flash drive. The metal was cold in his hand. That small object contained proof of his moral defeat. She had won the technical battle, yes. Hamas was financially disorganized, but the cost was Rachel's own transformation. She had ceased to be the white shadow, the invisible observer, to become the blind hammer. She plugged the pen drive into an isolated laptop, which was not connected to any network. The screen flashed and the list of files appeared. She clicked on a text file she had ignored at the time, named only readme.txt. The file opened. There was only one line written in perfect English. You can break the mirror, but you can't stop the reflection. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. The message was not written to the organization. It had been written for her. He knew she would read it. He knew that in the end, her curiosity would be greater than her caution. She looked around at the room full of cutting-edge technology that now seemed obsolete in the face of the raw reality of hawala and physical smuggling. The architect was right. She had broken the digital mirror, and now she had to deal with the shards, The victory that the director had celebrated in the official reports was an illusion. They had not stopped time. They just broke the clock. And without the clock, no one knew what time the next bomb would explode anymore. Rachel took out the pen drive and put it in her pocket. She made a decision. There would be no new beginning there in that cold room. The reconstruction could not be done with codes. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the exit. "Sarah," she called, not looking back. "You're in charge until further notice." "Where are you going?" the analyst asked, surprised. "I'm going out," Rachel said, pushing the heavy door open. "I need to see the sun. I need to see the real world before I forget what it looks like." As she climbed the 3 flights of stairs toward the surface, Rachmaninoff's sound seemed to follow her, echoing in the concrete, a soundtrack to the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another. The cafe on the corner of Dizengoff Street was a microcosm of the vibrant chaos that defined Tel Aviv. The clatter of espresso machines, the clinking of spoons, the chatter of politics and rental prices, the distant sound of sirens that no one else bothered to identify. Rachel sat at an outdoor table, under the shade of a faded parasol. She ordered a black coffee without sugar. The bitter taste was familiar, a sensory anchor in a world that seemed to have shifted its axis. She observed the movement of the street. A bicycle delivery man zigzagged between the cars, a thermal backpack on his back. A group of teenagers laughed, exchanging messages on their cell phones. A man in a suit paid his bill with a touch of the clock on the teller terminal. Flows. Everything was flows. Rachel touched the flash drive in her pocket. The message of the architect, "You can break the mirror, but you can't stop the reflection," still echoed in his mind, not as a threat, but as an axiom. She had spent a year trying to stop the flow, believing that if she could disrupt Hamas's financial machinery, the machine would stop. She was wrong. The machine did not stop. It dissolved. It has become liquid. The money that once travels through secure servers now travels in the hands of that delivery man, in that student's backpack, in that businessman's pocket. By destroying the rigid structure, it will release the kinetic energy of the system. Rachel's cell phone vibrated on the table. It was the director's office. They were waiting for a response about the promotion. The new offensive cybersecurity division needed a commander. They wanted the woman who pressed the Jericho button. They wanted the destroyer of digital worlds. Rachel looked at the device, seeing the name flashing on the screen. She thought of Avner, guarding the northern border with her binoculars, looking for enemies she could see and touch. He thought of the architect, rebuilding his network somewhere in the shadows, smarter and more cautious than before. The information war had no winners, she realized. There were no flags flying over enemy capitals, nor treaties of surrender signed on warships. There were only cycles of adaptation. She had created a vaccine, and the virus had mutated. Now, the virus was more resistant, and she needed to create a new cure. It was a race without a finish line. But there was a choice to be made. She could accept the position and continue the doctrine of brute force, teaching the next generation how to burn forests to kill a wolf. Or she could try something different, something more difficult. She answered the phone. "Director?" she said, her voice firm, competing with the noise of traffic. "Rachel, we are waiting. The paperwork is ready." "I do," she said, "but on one condition." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Conditions were not common at that level. "What condition?" "I rewrite the training curriculum. No Jericho 2.0. No scorched earth doctrine. Let's change the focus." "For what?" "To the gardening," Rachel said, knowing how absurd it sounded. "Gardening? Rachel, we're talking about national defense." "Exactly." She looked out over the street at the organic complexity of life that flowed before her. "We can't stop the weeds from growing, sir. If we try to burn the whole garden, we kill everything. What we need to do is prune. Control growth, understand the roots. Let's stop trying to blind the enemy and start trying to see what he sees." The director's silence was long. He was probably questioning her sanity. But Rachel knew he had no other option. The strategic failure of Jericho's success should already be showing up in his reports as well. Chaos was bad for business, bad for politics, and bad for security. "Write your proposal," he said at last with a tone of tired skepticism. "If it makes sense, we'll talk." Rachel hung up. It was not a definitive yes, but it was an opening. It was enough. She finished her coffee and left a money bill on the table, stuck under the saucer. A physical, anonymous, untraceable payment. A small tribute to the new world she had helped create. As she walked down the sidewalk, blending in with the crowd, Rachel felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The blame for the hospital in Gaza, for the arrogance of her clean war, was still there. A scar she would carry forever. But the paralysis had passed. She was no longer the white shadow. That code name belonged to a woman who believed in the perfection of systems. The woman who was now walking down Dizengoff knew that perfection was a lie. The world was dirty, noisy, and full of flaws, and the only way to protect him was not by hovering above him, but by getting his hands dirty in the dirt. She stopped at a red light. Next to him, a young man with headphones nodded his head to the rhythm of a song that only he heard. Rachel smiled, a small, sad smile. Maybe it was Rachmaninoff, maybe it was pop. It didn't matter. The important thing was that the music continued. The light opened. Rachel took the first step across the street, into the flow, ready for the next mutation, ready for the war that would never end, but that maybe, just maybe, could be fought with a little more humanity. The answer to the question that had haunted her, who wins when war becomes informational? It was there on the busy street. No one wins. Everyone just survives for the next day, adapting, learning, and, if they're lucky, remembering that on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the data stream, there's always another human being, listening to the same music, trying to protect their own garden,